Think back to a little over 1 year ago in March 2023. All arguments in the CPKC merger had been heard and everything left up to the STB. CN was probably the most against the plan, although NS had objections too. Then you take into consideration the smear campaign that the so-called coalition to stop CPKC went on, especially in the Chicago media market, emphasizing the 300% increase in freight traffic over the next 3 years. CN tried to get the STB to give them the KCS Kansas City to Springfield line, which, funny enough, had Illinois Central Gulf not sold it in 1987, they would have already. Metro tried to get the STB to give them dispatching rights over the Milwaukee district, ending a 40-year-old arrangement dating back to the sale of the Milwaukee Road to Sioux line. The Northwest Suburbs tried to get the STB to think of the children and how anarchy would rule if more trains ran on the Milwaukee District West. And in spite of all that, on March 15th, the STB announced that it had approved the merger of Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern to be effective 30 days later, or April 14th. So what has changed since then? Were the doomsday predictions correct? This is a look back at the CPKC merger 1 year later and how it has affected the Chicago area. First, let's take a look at that big scary traffic increase number. The CPKC plan did indeed call for a 300% increase in traffic on the Elgin and Chicago subs over the 3 years following the merger. That number was not imaginary. However, as it was used in the media, it was a bit misleading. Prior to the merger, CP ran 2 regular daily freights on the Chicago sub, 252 eastbound from Nahant Yard in Davenport, and 253 westbound back there. Then of course there were a few unit trains, but we're only going for daily numbers here. 253 was the only one of those that ran in daylight with any kind of regularity, religiously leaving Bensenville around 3 p.m. 252 usually came in overnight with only rare daylight appearances, and for many years, that was it. About a month after the merger, CPKC began running the first new train on the Elgin and Chicago subs. 180 from Bensenville to San Luis Potosi in Mexico, which I'm sure I pronounced incorrectly, and 181 back the other way. Not only were these trains set to carry auto racks full of new cars to a brand new unloading facility where the West Yard in Bensenville used to be, but they got a contract with Schneider and Swift for containers. These stack and rack trains began running in May. However, in spite of the 100% increase in traffic, the actual effects, both to general life and to Metra, have been relatively minimal, and in fact things have probably even gotten better. Let me explain. When 180 started running, CPKC had a problem. 253 usually left before evening rush hour, but once it got west of Elgin, it usually had some work to do in lieu of a dedicated local on the Chicago sub. This is all well and good, except the Chicago sub is almost entirely single track, and the sidings were designed in a time where 10,000-foot trains weren't the norm. So if 253 continued to leave before 180, it risked delaying 180 by not being able to clear the main to let it by. So 180 kept its post-rush hour departure time, while 253 was shifted to leave a couple hours after. 252's timing has been a bit all over the place, while 181 usually comes in mid-afternoon to evening, normally after evening rush. This means that typically, even though there are 2 more trains running every day, they are running at times that disrupt few people when compared to rush hour. Now, just a bit before now, as I'm writing this, the news has picked up the smear campaign about how more trains are running and crossings in Bensenville were blocked for hours and blah 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 blah. And it is true, CPKC has been running more unit trains west on the Chicago sub. However, placing the blame for this on the merger is inaccurate and lazy reporting. We'll just talk in westbound trains here. There are essentially 4 unit trains that run on the Chicago sub with various frequency. 528 is ethanol empties from Albany, New York. 541 comes from the NS, either at Galewood or Bensenville, and is also ethanol empties. 547 is a CSX transfer and comes from either Bar Yard or Bensenville. All 3 of these are headed to Iowa, usually either Mason City or Marquette. 641 is a sand empty train that comes from the Chicago Fort Wayne and Eastern and runs to Pattinson Sand in Clayton, Iowa. Of these four, 541 and 547 are by far the most common, running on average 2 to 3 times per week at various times of the day. 528 and 641 both usually run only a couple times per month, if that. But here's the thing, none of these are new symbols and none of these trains are any different than they were pre-merger. So to say delays due to these have increased following the merger is trying to put a round peg in a square hole. It just doesn't work. Relatively speaking, the freights tend to run at times when problems are minimal. The biggest problem I can remember happening was when a 252 broke in two around Hanover Park right before rush hour and Metro was forced to single track between Roselle and Elgin. There was also that one 547 that they were forced to run ahead of Metros because they weren't qualified on the Chicago sub and short on hours. But does any of that have anything to do with the merger? No. And to report it in the same breath is intentionally misleading. So we've talked about the effects in the suburbs, but what else has changed? Well, one of the biggest problems with the Chicago sub has been capacity. Back in the glory days, the entire line to Iowa was double track, but deferred maintenance led to most of the second track being ripped out in the Milwaukee Road downsizing of the 80s. The only double track sections left are from Randall Road to Pingree Grove and then around Savannah. Sidings were left at Genoa, Davis Junction, Adeline, and Kittredge. Kittredge is the closest to a modern length siding at 11,270 feet, but the others come in at 9,246, 8,738, and 7,949 feet. These aren't long enough to accommodate the modern megatrain, and there aren't many places to make meets happen. This is why, as part of increasing traffic on the line, CPKC is putting in a new 2.53-mile siding at Monroe Center. From pictures I've seen of the work, this will almost definitely be a radio-controlled switch, like Genoa is, meaning smoother entry and exit from the siding by trains that don't have to stop and handline the switches. I'm not sure when the new siding is supposed to go into service, but I would suspect later this year sometime. I've read rumors that they're preparing for an eventual conversion over to CTC for this line, but I just don't see it, at least not in the next couple years. Radio-controlled switches and ABS signaling are, in my opinion, sufficient for the traffic levels it sees. I guess we'd be more likely to see the existing sidings upgraded to radio-controlled, but again, not likely for a while. So what's in the future? Well, sometime this year we should see another new train start up, although I'm not sure what the symbol for it will be because CPKC reconfigured train symbols since the merger application was submitted. For example, it refers to train 140 from Bensenville to Toronto. This train changed symbols to 130 and then converted to a manifest train as 230 since the application. Anyway, the new run should be a daily train between Bensenville and Wiley, Texas, on the northeastern edge of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. The following year, we'll see 2 more added. On a significantly smaller scale, there have been other train changes, like K68, which now acts as a local for the entire Chicago sub, reducing the amount of en route work that 252 and 253 have. Bensenville is still going through some changes and reconfiguration, as has the adjacent UP Milwaukee sub, and I believe when all this work is done, Bensenville will be able to run even smoother than back in the glory days of the Milwaukee Road, but it may take some time to get there. We would be remiss if we didn't look at another consequence of the merger, other railroads stepping up their games. Schneider was the big one to switch to CPKC, although Knight Swift also did. In response, other railroads began working together to try and compete in the Mexico to Canada market. The most notable of these is the so-called Falcon Premium service between UP and CN. UP handles these between Mexico and Chicago, Dalton more specifically, and then CN takes the traffic from Markham to Halifax, Prince George, and Vancouver. Why they didn't do this at Global 4 instead and keep from having to run trucks between Dalton and Markham, I will never understand, but whatever. CSX and CPKC also teamed up to create a new interchange in Alabama. CN is also working with NS, who is also working with the Florida East Coast. The point being that even if you don't agree that CPKC has the most efficient route between Canada and Mexico, you have to admit that it has sparked other railroads that may have been treading water to up their games. For example, the Yard Center to Mexico City train that UP used to run, IYCMX, ran with little competition. Competition made it get an upgrade, now running as ZYCMX on a faster schedule. Competition makes everyone else better, and that can't be lost in all of this. So, has the CPKC merger been successful? I would argue yes. There have been some bumps in the road, but overall the two railroads fit together quite well. It helped a lot that there wasn't much overlap with the two only meeting in one point, Kansas City. Have the Chicago suburbs devolved into anarchy and chaos due to the new trains? Obviously, no. Is the media still taking every chance they can to take a dump on the merger? Obviously, yes. It's fresh in people's minds, but as time goes on, it will fade away. And remember, even with the 3 more additional daily trains in each direction, the Chicago subs still won't have as many trains every day as it did in the early 90s under Soo Line. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, or you can yell at me in the comments about how wrong I am. I don't really care either way. You can follow me on Instagram and Flickr, and read the blog, links are in the video description. Until next time, I'm Tyler, and thank you for watching the Northeastern Illinois Railfan YouTube channel.